Once every week or so on the CoS Strahd subreddit, someone will come on and leave a post saying, "I'm about to start CoS Strahd. Does anyone have any tips?" Part of me wants to say, welcome friend to one of the best D&D 5th edition modules out there, and to also a great community of people. The CoS Strahd Reddit group are amazing and really helpful and generous with their time and their help. Part of me also wants to say this has been asked pretty much twice a week for like however many months or years that the subreddit has been going. If you do a search on the subreddit for tips or new DM, or Google search something like CoS Strahd tips, you will probably see the dozens of posts that have covered this topic before. But that gave me an idea. I decided to go through the dozens or so of these posts, pick out and look for patterns of what the most popular, high voted suggestions were, and collate them into one video. So this is my top 15 Curse of Strahd tips, essentially crowdsourced by the Curse of Strahd subreddit. Greetings fellow Mistwanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. As I said in the intro, I'm going to give some tips that will help you to run Curse of Strahd. I have narrowed it down to 15. There were more than that, I assure you. Please don't be overwhelmed with the fact that there's 15. Some of them will be nice and quick, some of them should be straightforward, and hopefully they'll all help you. Let's get started. Number one, I'm not going to start with the most obvious advice, that's actually number two. Number one is kind of the, if this applies to you, then have a think about this. If you are a brand new DM and Curse of Strahd is your first campaign, I'm not saying don't run Curse of Strahd first, but have a think. Maybe consider running a shorter campaign, such as Lost Mine and Phandelver. That's what I did. It's a lot smaller, it's a lot more linear, it's a lot less complex, and I felt like I got all my mistakes out of the way through it by doing it. And then it meant that I went into going to Curse of Strahd a lot more experienced, a lot better, fewer mistakes were made during Curse of Strahd, whereas if I went straight into Curse of Strahd, probably would have been a train wreck, to be honest with you. If doing something like Lost Mine and Phandelver doesn't appeal to you, at least maybe do a couple of one-shots. Get some sort of experience under your belt, because Curse of Strahd, as I'll probably cover off in tips later on, isn't as straightforward as other D&D 5th edition campaigns, so you might want to try something a bit easier first of all. Number two, this is without a doubt the most popular advice I saw when browsing all the posts. Read the book. Read the book. Read the book. Some people say read it cover to cover. Some people say read it cover to cover multiple times. Some people say at least skim read it before you start. Some D&D books you could probably get away with just reading the introduction and maybe chapter 1 or 2 before you then need to move on to other areas. Curse of Strahd has a lot of interconnecting parts across multiple locations. I think from chapter 3 onwards, each chapter is a location. So chapter 1 is like introductory, chapter 2 is like the land as a whole, and chapter 3 is this location, chapter 4 is this location, so on and so on. So if you only read the first couple of chapters, you may miss some important context with where that location ties in with another location later on. So it's worth, at the very least, you don't need to know every single detail of every single room in every single dungeon and place they could go to, but at least have a good idea of how it all connects. And then number three, when you have read the book through, I know it's kind of contradictory advice because I'm saying read all the book, and then my next point was going to be that try and take each location one at a time. It can overwhelm, and over preparation is a thing. You might want to just, once you've read the book through, if you're doing Death House, reread Death House, then reread Village of Barovia, Serpool Encampment, and then maybe start preparing Vallaki as they get closer to it. And then once they get to Vallaki, you can then read up about more places from there. And you'll remember from the first time or times you read it what you need to do. Number four, space out events. So most of the chapters have a thing where they have at the end of each chapter a special events thing where things can happen while they are in a location. Vallaki, the main town, which is a beast in itself, in and of itself to prepare for. There's quite a few that are time dependent, so make sure you know about those. And make sure you space them out as well, because you don't want to have them all fire off immediately. It can be a bit overwhelming for the players, overwhelming for you. And then you have kind of like all this stuff happening in Vallaki, and then nothing happens later on. If you spread it out, almost like they visit, maybe 1 or 2 of the events trigger. They leave to go to maybe one of the locations, they come back, another event triggers. They leave, come back, another event triggers, that kind of thing. And then of course, I think it's like 3 days after they arrive, one event triggers anyway. And then a few days after that, another might trigger, something like that. So be aware of that, just so that you're kind of spreading them out nicely and in a way that kind of helps Vallaki to stay and feel like it's just constantly alive and buzzing and things are going on. Number 5, don't be afraid to ask the players, what are you doing next, to help with your planning. You know, you don't want to like railroad the players into a certain thing, but at the same time, you don't want, if there's 3 potential places they could go to, but they're only realistically going to go to 1 in the next session, you don't want to have to prepare for all 3. So I don't think there's any harm for a sandbox campaign such as this to say, guys, where do you think you're going to go to next after you leave Vallaki this next time, for example? And they might say, oh, we're going to go to the werewolf den. Great. At least then you can pour all your effort into the werewolf den rather than 2 or 3 other places. Number 6, there are a bunch of modification guides and remixes people have done. Don't feel like you have to add them in or run them, even if people are sort of saying they're amazing. Running Curse of Strahd straight out of the book is, for the most part, you can't go too far wrong. There are some people who say, oh, it does have its flaws. I think every campaign probably has its flaws. But the problem with, especially if you're a new DM or you're new to Curse of Strahd, it's overwhelming enough as it is. If you then start thinking, I'm going to use some of Dragna Carter's stuff, that's a very popular guide. Or his guide's actually called Curse of Strahd Reloaded, but the guy who made it, his username is Dragna Carter. There's also a woman called Mandy Mod. There's also a group called Lunch Break Heroes, another one called Pyram King. They can be good, and I borrowed piecemeal some stuff, which I think is the way to go. You know, I research a location and think, oh, I'm going to use this Dragna Carter thing and this Mandy Mod thing. That works really well. If you are new to Curse of Strahd, I don't think there's any harm in just sort of having a look, taking what you like, but it can get very complicated if you start doing all these other tweaks and throwing them in, and can become a bit complex and convoluted and messy. Number 7, we've already talked about the Curse of Strahd subreddit in the context of leaving the post, asking for tips. Don't be afraid to ask other posts or research on there for people's posts. If you're struggling with an issue, use their search function, see if someone's left a post asking the question, and if they haven't, feel free to do it yourself. I was never a big fan of Reddit before joining Reddit. I always thought it was full of very sort of rude, toxic people, and I guess there are some subreddits that are. Curse of Strahd subreddit is honestly, and the Ravenloft subreddit as well, honestly one of the most friendliest, giving places I have ever known on the internet, and I've been using the internet since the 90s. So it's amazing how good the people are on there. Not all of them, you know, every community has its jerks, and there might be 1 or 2 people who are a bit rude and not very friendly when they dole out advice, but the vast majority of people on there are really cool and really nice and really friendly and more than happy to help you, myself included. There's also a pinned resources and tips post that I suggest you look at as well, which has links to some of the mods I mentioned a thingy ago, where it's things like Dragna Carter and Mandy Mod and that, and they'll have links to things and more tips as well. Number 8, stack the deck. And when I say stack with quote marks, it's because I have a kind of in-between solution, which I'll get to in a minute. But there's Madame Eva's tarokka reading that leads the players to items and a fated ally who help with to take down Strahd. Running it out of the book can be a bit risky, it can be a bit messy, there can be some items found in the wrong order, or a really strong item found really early that makes the campaign a lot easier for the players, or items in very difficult to get to places, or bad fit allies or weak allies. So some people say stack the deck. Just choose what you want, and you know, maybe the cards are already laid out before you do it, or maybe you do some sort of sleight of hand card trick where it looks like you're making it's random but it's not. I prefer random than doing it stacked, but what I did is I removed a few cards before doing it random, and that made it a bit easier. And what I've come up with since is a DM's Guild resource called the 3-pile tarokka technique, where you can kind of have it sort of semi-controlled, semi-random, but also semi-stacked. The items are laid out in a way that you're more likely to find a tome really early, that's the information on Strahd. The players are more likely to find the Sun Sword later on, that's the sort of super vampire killing weapon. And it's likely all 3 end up in 3 different places as well, so there's no risk of, say, 3 items ending up in Castle Ravenloft, for example. But you can still do it random to an extent, so you can still shuffle the cards in front of the players and lay them out and say, there's been no tricks here, I've not rigged the deck or whatever. But yes, don't run it raw, rules written out of the book, where you are literally just doing the draw, all 40 item cards in one pile. Check out the DM's Guild resource. I'll do a thing where a little link appears, you can click it, or you can find it on my channel elsewhere or in the description. Number 9, make sure you have a session 0 with your players. I think this is kind of standard advice nowadays anyway. For Curse of Strahd, I think it's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's got some heavy themes. Yes, it's a horror campaign, but there's things like child death in it. There's other stuff that people may not be comfortable with. So you need to make sure your players, or you should make sure your players are comfortable with that kind of stuff before throwing them in that environment, and then they find out the hard way. Maybe let them know that this is a difficult campaign. This is not an easy or, you know, sort of medium campaign, if you will. It's known to be hard, it's known to be difficult. Maybe it probably wouldn't hurt if they had a backup character in mind. And while you don't want to have your players not put much effort into their characters, you might want to say they may want to have a backup character just in case their character that they love gets killed off in the first or second session. You probably want to say that non-evil PCs are best here, probably good heroic PCs, neutral PCs who don't really care what happens, and evil PCs who want to buddy up with Strahd aren't probably going to work. And I speak from experience as well. One of my players wanted to play an evil warlock, and I was like, yeah, that's fine, what's worst that can happen? And he wasn't too bad, actually. He was, I think he knew not to get too carried away and be chaotic and send my campaign off the rails, but still, it did make life a little bit harder. PCs who are all good, who want to defeat Strahd and free the people of Barovia is what you want. Make sure they know it's a sandbox as well. Sandboxes are kind of a blessing and a curse for players, I guess, because most players probably prefer a sandbox and something that's kind of linear and feels a bit more railroaded. But a sandbox as well can be overwhelming, and then they leave Vallaki and there might be 3 or 4 places they need to go to, and they might freeze and think, oh god, where do we go next? So there are actually some people who may not like the idea of that and may want something where it's a bit more directional. So make sure your players want something like that. Number 10, don't tie in backstories directly into Barovia, and don't have any PCs from Barovia, at least not initially. I've seen some people say they'll have one player will be a Vistana, one person will be from the village of Barovia, one person will be secretly a member of the Order of Silver Dragon in Argynvostholt. The whole thing about Curse of Strahd and Barovia is the players are pulled in from another world, and so if they just happen to have some sort of connection with Barovia, it feels a bit contrived. So it's one of those campaigns where you don't really need to tie a character's backstory directly into Barovia. Indirectly works well. So if you have a paladin or a dragonborn character, then there may be some sort of connection to the Order of Silver Dragon. You know, if you have a character who likes to hunt lycanthropes, then potentially the werewolf den could be some sort of tie-in. But yeah, I wouldn't directly have them be tied to it. And when I said earlier, don't have them be from Barovia or the Domains of Dread initially, I actually introduced a player halfway through the campaign who was from another Domain of Dread. But at that point, my players kind of knew through people like Esmeralda and Dr. Rudolph van Richten what Barovia was and what the Domains of Dread were, so it was okay. You don't want to have that spoiled or introduced really early on. But if you do it sort of mid-campaign and you already know that kind of stuff, if you have a PC die and you need a replacement PC, maybe you could have another PC be from Barovia or another Domain of Dread. And then that works well then, because you've got potential hooks and places that you can go to after the campaign wraps up if you plan to carry on with the same PCs doing something after Curse of Strahd, which is what I've done in my own game. Number 11, don't do an Ireena PC. Or I don't want to say don't do it. Be careful if you do it. It sounds like a good idea in theory. So those mod guides I talked about earlier, I think this was originally a Mandy mod idea. Her guides are great, and I used a lot of her stuff. I didn't use an Ireena PC. This is where the PC, the reincarnation of Tatiana, Strahd's obsession, is Ireena. I actually had a player who was a woman with red hair like Ireena. And so I could have done this in my game. And it does sound like one of those things that's good in theory, but then you have this character who's got plot armor. You've got this character who Strahd is obsessing over. That might actually make the player uncomfortable, given that, you know, especially Strahd's obsession with Tatiana, you know, kind of then you're putting that obsession, channeling Strahd's obsession into that PC, and that player might not be cool with that. It makes that PC more important than the other PCs, which might be, the other PCs might be like, hey, we're over here, like, you know, give us some attention, please. So I don't want to say don't do it. And a lot of DMs would say don't do it, but just be very careful if you do consider it. Number 12, learn to understand Strahd. You've got his chapter in the beginning of the book that lays out his goals and what he's like and his history. Make sure you know his stat block, even ahead of the final battle, just in case. And there's some section underneath the stat block that talks about his minions, talks about other stuff as well that might be handy to look at. There's a great guide by a Reddit user called Guild's Bounty. I'll put it in the description, a link to it in the description. I think it's called something like My Notes Honoring Strahd as an Unholy Terror. And that's just really good. It's long, but I encourage you to read it. It's really good for just getting into Strahd's head. It tells you about what Strahd thinks of the PCs and stuff. And, you know, Strahd is a general. Strahd is a vampire. Strahd is bored. And you think, what? Strahd is bored? But it's true. He's been a vampire for hundreds of years. You know, of course he's a little bit bored and getting very tired of immortality now, potentially. Just stuff like that. It's just great to read. And for me, it kind of put Strahd in a different light and helped me to understand better. And there's also some old novels as well. So there's a great one called I, Strahd, Memoirs of a Vampire, which is essentially like the Tome of Strahd, but expanded out. And it's basically Strahd's own story of how he became a vampire. It's important to note that this is an earlier edition of D&D, so that how he makes his pact is different in that novel to how it is in Curse of Strahd. But I still recommend reading it just for understanding and getting into Strahd's head a bit more. He is a bit of a biased narrator in that, you know, a lot of people say it's not really the true events, it's just Strahd's version of them, but it still helps to understand him. Number 13, consider milestone leveling over experience. There's a rough guide in the book of what triggers milestones, things like each time they find one of the tarokka items, when they find that ally, potentially when they complete an area. If you do all of them like that, they're going to go past level 10. That's another thing which I haven't got in my notes, but I'd probably recommend, you know, making sure they fight Strahd in the finale at level 9 at the highest, because level 10 onwards they get a lot more ability spells that'll make Strahd a lot easier to defeat. I'd kind of cap it at level 9. They turn level 10 once you defeat Strahd, as I think the book suggests. But yes, milestone leveling, I think once you've done the tarokka reading and know where they're going, you'll get a better idea of, right, this is when I'll make them level 7, this is when I'll make them level 8, this is when I'll make them level 9. And from there, you kind of have a good idea of how they progress and level up. Number 14, slightly controversial one, don't be afraid to TPK. I said it. It's a horror campaign. Don't hold back. There'll be some DMs who say, don't pull your punches. And even if you do have a TPK, most of the locations or most of the people, there's outs. For instance, the people, instead of killing the PCs, might just knock them out or might just leave them for dead, that kind of thing. So there might be something then that they're just captured or something. I do a whole other video about that, by the way, if you want to know about that further. That said, don't be too hard on your players, because there's the risk that if the entire campaign is a slog and it's hard and it's dreary and there's no hope and every single battle is a near TPK or at least one PC dies. I've seen stories and read stories on the CoS subreddit where a DM will say, my players don't want to play Curse of Strahd anymore. They just, you know, it's gotten too hard for them. So you don't want to pull your punches, but you don't want to just have every single session and every single battle be an uphill struggle. Let them have the wins, especially when they get things like 2 sunlight items. You know, they've worked hard to get those. Make sure they use them and fry a vampire spawn or 2. And number 15, lastly, have fun. This is D&D. It's a game. It's not only supposed to be fun for the players, it's supposed to be fun for you, my fellow DM, as well. If you're running it or thinking of running it and you are getting stressed out and you are not having a fun time, then that's not fair on you. So make sure you are having fun every step of the way. And that's it for this one. Short and sweet video. Some of my videos tend to go on for 30 plus minutes. I've got some of my Ravenloft videos are over an hour long. Ridiculous, I know. But I wanted to put this out, and then whenever someone does one of those posts where they say, any tips for Curse of Strahd, you might see my comments saying, I did a video all about this. And hopefully some people will discover other videos. I have the Curse of Strahd videos where I talk about what resources, to expand a bit more about some of the resources I talked about on here. Easy to miss details in Curse of Strahd. Mistakes DMs make that you probably don't want to make in your own campaign. Did a video recently-ish about the final battle combat strategy for Strahd, depending on where he is in the castle. Stuff like that. I've got a whole playlist of a bunch of videos. Feel free to check that out. I also do videos about wider Domains of Dread, the wider Ravenloft setting beyond Barovia, from the information from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Feel free to check that out if you want. If you ever want to consider running Volkovnia, that's the zombie siege, zombie apocalypse domain, or some of the other domains as a one-off or a one-shot, or what I've done is as a sequel to Curse of Strahd. Strahd has been defeated, they then visit other Domains of Dread, then feel free to check those out. I also cover off some characters who you may want to then chuck into CoS Strahd as well, such as other proteges of Dr. Rudolf van Richten, Jan the Sunstar, who's a very popular, good vampire who did actually appear in Barovia once upon a time. Stuff like that. And we'll end this one there. Thank you, Mr. Wanderers.